the big questions today, if you want to launch an app, is which L2 do you launch on? It's a difficult question.
Base rollups, from my point of view, are even cooler than native rollups.
Essentially, like, the ticker is ETH, but why? Like, why does consuming all of these services accrue value to ETH, the asset?
And you basically just came out now and are saying that is the only thing that cannot be commoditized. Welcome back to the Rollup, your home for technical talks and open conversations that shape the modular future. Nothing on today's show is to be construed as financial advice. You can see our full disclosures list at therollup.co/ventures. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode after a quick word from some of our awesome partners.
Redstone is DeFi's modular oracle, supporting over 100 clients on over 50 chains and offering 1,000 assets. Redstone is the leader for Bitcoin staking and yield-bearing assets. They offer the most robust, customizable price feeds available in any model. Join the Redstone exhibition today.
Welcome back to the Rollup. Today we have an episode about the native and based rollup design that Justin Drake here has been pushing forward towards the EF. We're joined today with Fede. Fede is a outwardly spoken Argentinian man that likes to stir the pot and express his opinion openly. So glad to have him today. Fede, it's your first time on the show. Welcome in. And yeah, man, how are you doing today?
All good. I'm here in Barcelona, so I cannot complain. Great city.
Nice. And Justin, it's your second or third time back. Quite a few things have changed since our last conversation. How are you, and how's your latest research been?
Yeah, I'm doing great. There's so much happening behind the scenes at the EF and also publicly. Small side note, my mom is also Argentinian, so I do have a little bit of that, blood in me.
¿Hablas español?
Sí,
Claro
un
que
poco.
sí, ¿eh?
No, but you can see his blood when he debates with Bitcoin people. The other day I saw the debate on L2s, and it was pretty good. I like it.
I gave a couple of Ethereum talks in Spanish, but yeah, those were really hard.
Yo también hablo un poquito español. Soy de Florida. My accent needs some work, though. Epic. I mean, it would be incredible if we could do this entire. Maybe our AI agent will translate this into Spanish for our Latin American friends. As Andy said, we're going to be talking about native rollups predominantly today, also based rollups, and just putting together the entire ultrasound thesis. I listened into one of the first native rollup calls. I think it was maybe a combination of a sequencing call and a native rollup call was a big topic. And I was astounded at the level of social consensus that has already started to coalesce around this initiative. I think we heard videos from Stephen Goldfeder, from Jesse, from Base, from Hayden Adams. It seemed like everyone that was running a prominent rollup stack or app in the ecosystem had something good to say about native rollups and describe their intentions to end up upgrading to this new design. So I really enjoyed the support that is already garnered around this. I am curious kind of like what needs to happen from an implementation perspective. Like, do we need a hard fork? Do we need an EIP or an ERC? Maybe we'll get into that a little bit more. But before we do, Justin, maybe you could lay the groundwork here. And before we get into anything too deeply technical, you could just speak at a high level about base rollups, native rollups, the way that they work together to ultimately achieve the ultrasound thesis for ETH.
And perhaps, Justin, a bit on why this is an important change from the current setup, I think would be helpful.
Okay, got it. So yeah, I do agree with you that native rollups, which is completely different to base rollups, is an easy sell for people. At least so far has been an easy sell. Just to contrast things, I proposed base rollups, a year and a half ago or so. Seriously trying to advocate for it, and at the beginning it was me versus the world. Like, no one was bought in, and like slowly every week I'd have like one more supporter, and kind of this up only kind of process of pilling people. And now finally we're starting to to reach a place where people start to appreciate it. On the other hand, native rollups, like day one, people like get really excited. So it's a rather easy sell. Now to zoom out, the way that I think about the world computer as a service that is provided to L2s is that it breaks down into 4 different sub-services. The first one is settlement, and that is the most basic one. If you want to be an L2, you have to consume settlement, and that means posting state roots and having some sort of a bridge so that you can make use of all of the TVL. And we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of TVL that you can access by being an L2. But then if you want to go above and beyond, there's 3 optional services that are at your disposal. The first one is data availability. And if you consume L1 data availability, you're set to be a rollup. And then the 2 other optional services are number 1, sequencing. And if you do consume L1 sequencing, meaning you have the L1 validators do the ordering of transactions for your L2, then you're set to be based. And then the final one is execution. And this is something that you can't do today. And this is the whole proposal of native rollups, is basically to have L2s, if they so wish, have the execution be done by the L1 validators, as opposed to having a custom form of execution in the form of a fraud-proof game, which is like custom written, or a snark proof. Now, specifically, native rollups, what they're trying to do is solve multiple problems. One of the first problems that we have today with EVM equivalent rollups is that they're actually not equivalent. They have bugs, they have vulnerabilities. They're trying their best to be equivalent, but really it's extremely hard to build a perfect copy of the EVM in the form of a fraud-proof game or a snark circuit. The second problem that native rollups is trying to solve is that of security councils. So, we have bugs, and therefore we have security councils. But there's a second reason that we have security councils, which is that the L1 EVM is itself a living thing, right? For every hard fork that changes the EVM, whether it's a new opcode, a new precompile, or a gas schedule change, if you want to maintain EVM equivalence at L2, well, you need to be able to mutate. And in order to mutate, you need some form of governance, whether that's a security council or maybe some sort of token governance. And the unfortunate reality is that this form of possible mutation is itself an attack vector above and beyond the vulnerabilities that may happen accidentally. The third problem that we're trying to solve is single threading. So the EVM is kind of notoriously known and famous to be single threaded. And really what we're trying to do here is to open an easy way to parallelize L1 EVM execution. And the fourth problem that I think is related is just removing gas limits. So the dream is that there just won't be any more gas limits. The only meaningful limit to computation is data availability. If you're talking about pure execution, then really you shouldn't be limited. And that's partly because you have access to this parallelism, but also to a large extent because we can make use of the magic of snarks. And then there's all sorts of other ancillary benefits of native rollups that I've kind of discovered over the last few months. So one of them, which I didn't mention in my write-up, is that it actually solves post-quantum security for us. So today, as an L2, that's a ZK rollup, for example, I will post some snark proofs that are very small, that are based on elliptic curves, something like ROF16 or Planck, and those are not post-quantum secure. So the reason why the teams do that is to pay less gas, but then that means that they're not credibly going to survive if they were to be immutable for the next few decades and centuries. Whereas if you were to be a native rollup, well, as soon as the L1 is post-quantum secure, then the L2 is also kind of automatically become post-quantum secure. And then there's some synergies around composability, this idea that you can, the L1 has a few superpowers that L2s don't have. One of them being that they have the option, if the community chooses so, to do what's called delayed execution, where the state roots are kind of only exposed to the L1 with a 1-slot delay. It's a bit of a technical kind of detail, but it's an important one. And what that means is that we can have synchronous composability with next slot real-time proving. So the whole of this is like maybe technical mumbo jumbo, but it basically means that synchronous composability only requires this weak form of real-time proving where the proofs need to arrive within 12 seconds, as opposed to maybe 100 milliseconds, which is 2 orders of magnitude less and so much harder.
And Fede, maybe you have some thoughts to jump in. If not, Justin, could you kind of like just round out the picture of combining each of these services that the Ethereum World Computer offers: settlement, DA, sequencing, execution? Let's say someone is entirely bought in. They're bought in on being native for execution, based for sequencing, and a rollup for DA, and ultimately consuming settlement. How does this essentially, like, the ticker is ETH, but why? Like, why does consuming all of these services accrue value to ETH, the asset?
Yeah, so this is a question that I get a lot. Like, 2 or 3 years ago, I was known as Mr. Ultrasound Money, and people made the assumption that all of my research from that point onwards was all about maximizing the bird and pumping ETH. And this is like far, far from the truth, at least for base rollups and native rollups. If you look at native rollups, this is something that the L1 would provide for free, effectively. There would be no value extraction. It's something that's optional, that can be used for the L2s if they so wish. And what we've seen is that L2s that can make use of the superpower, namely the EVM equivalent rollups, are super excited about making use of that for free. Now, technically speaking, if you read the ETH research post, there is a gas limit and there is an EIP 1559 mechanism. But again, the bottleneck is not going to be execution. The bottleneck is going to be data availability. So the only reason why we have a gas limit is to prevent the denial of service at the prover level, not at the verifier level. And I don't expect meaningful amounts of extraction to happen there. Now, if we look at the base rollups, the story is a little bit more complicated. And the reason is that, yes, when you opt in to the base sequencer, by default, if you do it naively, then you will lose your MEV. And that's kind of, and that MEV will basically go to the L1 validators. And so in some sense, you're indirectly paying for that privilege. But there's kind of 2 things that are happening in parallel. The first one is that the applications are starting to recapture the MEV themselves. So that MEV will no longer leak to the sequencer, and therefore you're making a very, very small gambit. I call it the MEV gambit, where you give up, maybe 1% of your revenue, but you double, you triple, you quintuple your traffic, and you increase your congestion fees that do accrue to you as an L2, regardless of whatever sequencer you may use. And then there's a second thread of research, which is around something called execution tickets, which is this idea that maybe the L2s can sell ahead of time the right to make use of their L2s by the sequencers, and basically recapture that MEV that would have been leaked. But my thesis is that in the long term, we won't need all of this complexity with execution tickets. We can just give it up and have a very simple design.
The first part, native on base rollups, and I think I can explain or give another perspective of why I believe that base rollups are more difficult they're easier in some way to implement, because we don't need any change in the EVM. We don't need a new precompile, but they're more difficult due to, from my point of view, social and political reasons to have them in production as a default. Native rollups are something that everybody will want, because right now you have 2 ways of creating a rollup. A rollup at the end is just a blockchain with a safe bridge to Ethereum. So to have a safe bridge, what you need to do is to verify that the second blockchain, the rollup, did things correctly there's two ways of doing that. Either with ZK, with mathematics. I am on that team. I have been working on building that for the last few years with different customers. On the other way is with fraud proofs. Originally, everybody thought, or I thought also, that fraud proof would be easier, right? Because mathematics, cryptography is more difficult. But what happened is that the way you do fraud proofs or optimistic rollups is by being able to, the rollup does everything, and you suppose that everything went well, but somebody can go and challenge what the rollup did. You can go and say like, no, look, from here to here, you lied, you did a mistake. To be able to do that, you need to implement in Solidity in some way or form. There's different ways of doing it, but you need to re-implement the EVM in Solidity. So you need to re-implement a VM to be able to show that somebody lied logically in one step. So to do that, it's complicated. You have a lot of Solidity. There was, if I'm not wrong, Arbitrum, I believe, found a few months ago a bug in the fraud-proof system of Optimism. They fixed it. On two, it's complicated, not only because you have to re-implement it in Solidity, but because your VM needs to be able to be open up, to have like introspection, to be able to see the memory, the call stack, so that anybody can go and watch what the VM is doing, to then be able to go and challenge it on the other one. So what I'm trying to say is like, it seems super simple, theoretically super simple. In engineering-wise, it's so difficult to get right. That's why until recently we didn't have permissionless fraud-proof rollups. Arbitrum just launched Bold. Anybody can go on. That's an amazing. I have huge respect for Arbitrum engineering skills. They implemented something where anybody can challenge the steps done by the VM. But that has been super, like very smart people, and I'm pretty impressed by how they did it, because I believe like long term, ZK is gonna solve that in an easier way. So why native rollups are already sold to everyone? It's because you don't need to do that. What we will do is just have something inside the VM, that something is called precompile. It's just a way to easily show that anybody can go and dispute and say like, hey, I want to make sure that the change from A to B went well. So what you only do is you have the default EVM of Ethereum, making sure that that change went correctly. So from my point of view, this will enable, as a ZK person, I think this makes way cheaper, because you don't need to run a VM on top of the EVM written in Solidity that is back prone, difficult to do, expensive, slow. This will make optimistic rollups way more. The market should adopt them way more, because they will just work. They will be easy. So I don't see any criticism to native rollups. Base rollups, from my point of view, are even cooler than native rollups. I was on the team that publicly criticized Justin when they came, because I was working with all these teams that raise money, and I couldn't, I didn't criticize it because I was against Justin or anything like that. I didn't fully understand its power. It was a little bit more complicated because I didn't fully understand the map pipeline, and I didn't fully understand the full flow. Once I understood it, I could see that there was no contradiction between the teams that raised money, between the people that were running the centralized sequencers, on giving that to the L1 proposers on the L1 validator set. However, and we can go into the details, I believe that the problem is not MEV, as Justin said. Like, it's not a technical problem. I believe there's a more political or social problem, because if instead of having a centralized sequencer, what you do is you put this sequencing on the L1, you have a more free market. There will be people that will be competing for that MEV more openly on that. There's obviously teams that don't want that or would prefer not to do it. Like, we can go into details and can explain it in detail. That's my theory. I think technologically, it's there's no way it has something bad. There's some potential criticism, but I think there's a more like economic type of debate where some people might want to delay it. I think long term, everybody will do it.
Anything to add there, Justin?
No, yeah, I do want to highlight something that Fede said, that one of the selling points of native rollups is simplicity, right? You're able to take potentially thousands of lines of code that describe a SNOC circuit or fraud-proof game and replace that with basically one line of code that calls this execute precompile. That's what it's called. I would also very much agree with Fede that the native rollups is, in some sense, 90% a technical thing, and maybe 10% social, whereas it's flipped with the base rollups. It's 80% incentive alignment and social alignment, and we don't even need a hard fork to unlock base rollups. We can start doing them today, and the 20% technology is all around unlocking pre-confirmations, which is something that we should see in production in a big way this year.
Awesome. So before we get deeper into the technicals, I'm going to throw a curveball here. I put out a tweet the other day that really ruffled some feathers, and it's because the first part of the tweet said Ethereum needs to tax the L2s. And people said many things to me about this from a multitude of, well, what are you going to do? It's impossible to tax the L2s. You can't raise DA prices. You can't enforce a tax. But what I was trying to really get to is that there's very little rent being paid to Ethereum and to Ethereum holders and stakers from L2s today, and centralized sequencers of L2s, namely the larger ones, are making a lot of ETH and then not actually using it back in DeFi, or it's just kind of sitting idle and not really contributing to the broader flow of the L1 stakers or validators. And so I'm curious, Justin, from your perspective, while I'm sure you disagree with this idea of taxing, because why are we going to sit here and try to fight for scraps when we're still so early, right? The entire game for Ethereum is to operate at the economy of scale. But would you say that native rollups are a shift in the direction of, and you kind of explained it earlier, but I just want to get further confirmation of returning value back to Ethereum L1, returning value back to ETH, the asset? Like, is that the main prerogative that you have for this? Or is it that plus the technicals, plus the other factors here? Because part of my thing was like, we really need to figure out a way to get these centralized sequencers basically returning their, like, some of their profits in some capacity back to stakers or L1 or validators. And so I'm not sure that that's the exact right way to do it. And frankly, I don't think that me using the word tax was the right nomenclature, but I think that that's kind of the general thought that I had. So curious if you see native rollups as kind of that directionally in the same kind of way.
Yeah, so from an enforcement perspective, like, you need to be able to enforce the tax, and I agree with the people who said that it's very difficult to enforce because the L1 doesn't really know what is an L2, it doesn't have such a notion. One of the mental models that I have is to just look at the fundamental computational resources that are at play with a blockchain. We have things like bandwidth, compute, and disk I/O and storage. And like, my thesis is that we're going to commoditize almost all of these resources. So with Snarks, we can commoditize execution. We can commoditize disk I/O. And the one thing that is basically impossible, in my opinion, to commoditize is the bandwidth component, which comes through data availability. And I think that is the one fundamental bottleneck that we have in blockchains, and that is the only place where we can meaningfully accrue value. Now, in some sense, the native rollups do a couple things. On the one hand, they will try and commoditize the complement of data availability. So they will help commoditize execution. Right now, well, if we roll back the clock 5 years ago, execution was a differentiating factor. We had L2s raise hundreds of millions of dollars to build this technical moat around who could be the first one to have a fraud-proof game or snark circuit. And now, ironically, we're seeing a lot of the most sophisticated teams in the world, L2 teams, I mean, that are just ditching all of that technology. Like Scroll just ditched that technology, ZK Sync ditching that technology, and it's basically just using commoditized components, ZK VMs from vendors like RISC-0 and SP1 and others. And in some sense, native rollups is the natural conclusion of this commoditization efforts. Now, the other thing that native rollups is doing, and this is a little bit of a subtle point, is that it is, in some sense, a little bit pushing the needle towards rollups versus non-rollups. So basically, it's trying to encourage L2s in some way to make use of DA. Now, it's not to say that you can't have native L2s that are not rollups. You can have what I call optimiums, where basically you post the data off chain, and then there's a fraud-proof game that can be brought on chain. But if you want specifically rollups that have the synchronous composability and the security properties of native execution, you're going to need to consume DA, Ethereum DA. And so in that sense, it's not only commoditizing the complement, but it's also, to an extent, increasing the demand for DA. But like my thesis is that anyone who wants this high grade security, this high grade composability, is going to want L1 DA regardless of the native execution. So I don't think it's that much of a shift.
Yep. Yeah, if you introduce all DA, you introduce a different sequencer or different validator set, you lose some of the composability properties. And that's important for this entire design to work. Also, what's funny, Justin, is that on Twitter, there's been a war being fought that DA is a commodity for a while. And you basically just came out now and are saying that is the only thing that cannot be commoditized. Right. Now, I think data availability committees are commodities. Right. Those are commodities because they don't have the same network effects that you get from this native rollup design, the interop, all the security properties. But I guess then, I mean, before we get deeper into technicals, my last one here is Base is saying, okay, look, we're going to push to 250 megagas per second. We're just upping the gas limit. Right now, we're at like 20, I think 25 is maybe the highest that they got recently, around there. That's 30 to 40% of Ethereum blob space currently. So Base is basically saying to everybody else, like, we are willing to go and push the limits and eat all the blob space, and everybody else is going to have to kind of figure it out as they go in terms of their ability to increase the gas limits. So with your vision of this kind of infinite gas limit per se, or this ability to remove the gas limits, that is also very much reliant on the Pectra hard fork and dank sharding and the ability for Ethereum to scale its DA component relatively quickly. Is that correct? Or is there a better way to think about this thesis with regards to Ethereum's roadmap?
What will happen over time is that, yes, we will increase DA, and we will increase it, I think, even more aggressively than people realize. So yes, we have the 2x bump in Pectra. Yes, we have dank sharding, which might bring us to 128 blobs per slot. But I'm actually a believer of 1,024 blobs per slot and beyond. And part of the reason is that we have Nielsen's law, which is that every year on a compounding basis, we have a 50% increase in bandwidth for internet connections around the world, and there's no real reason to believe that that's going to stop. I kind of went down this rabbit hole for a whole week at one point, and I was kind of asking myself, okay, how much throughput can we push through a single fiber of optic cable? And this is something ridiculous. It's about the width of a human hair, and you can push orders and orders of magnitude more than what we can today, like way more than a petabit per second. And so the hard bit was kind of laying all of the fiber, digging all of these holes, and connecting to everyone's homes. And now, the only thing that we have to do to upgrade the internet infrastructure, I'm simplifying a little bit, is to update the endpoints. So all of the routers and the switches and all of that infrastructure, which is so much easier to upgrade than laying the fiber, which is a one-time job. So I am expecting Nielsen's law to kind of keep on continuing for a decade, maybe 2 decades. And when you compound 50% per year over a decade, that's 57x. So like call it 100x, like it's roughly 2 orders of magnitude. And what I'm hoping we'll see is that within the next 10 years, when you have Nielsen's law plus full dank sharding plus all of the amazing data compression that the rollups can also do on their end, we're going to get to 10 million transactions per second, which sounds completely insane, but that's where I think we're heading, and I think it's enough for everyone, because it's roughly 100 transactions per day per human, and every human will have all of these agents acting on their behalf, and they're going to want to make roughly 100 transactions per day. That seems like a reasonable back of the envelope to me. I know that people like don't believe that there will be that much demand, but I am I guess a believer in the what is the term, the induced demand that we will have from being able to lower the fees. But yeah, at this point in time, actually, the economics are totally distorted. We're very, very far from this end game. One of the things that we're seeing is that the applications are still not, recapturing their MEV. And so if you look at an actor like Base, they're making a ton of value for MEV, and that is just like temporary noise. Another thing that we're seeing is that the vast majority of the burn is coming through L1 execution as opposed to the blobs. And again, this is just a temporary anomaly, just because the L1 execution is so limited. But as soon as we have these snark verifiers and all of that magic, then it will no longer be the bottleneck.
Anything to add there?
Yeah, quite a few things. So the first one, it's funny, Justin, that you were mentioning the fiber cables that connect all the world. I used to work on that, on the routers, and I have helped scale those routers before crypto. A lot of like physicists. You're a physicist, right, Justin? Like physicists, mechanical engineers, because there's a lot of like things related to light, backends. I was only on the router. You're a physicist, right? Or no, mathematician. Sorry.
No, mathematician. Dankrat is the physicist.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so related to that, I have been working on the core infrastructure of internet since 2005 professionally. Since 2003, more on my as a hacker or engineer, and I have seen how everybody thought that the demand wouldn't be there, on that that you would hold some special property as an infrastructure provider that will have a motto that will block competitors. I don't believe that exists. Like, I agree with everything that Justin said. I think that bandwidth is I think Solana people also say it, is the end game. But from my point of view, I'm more like I'm closer to a taxi driver than to Justin or Dan Grant way of thinking. I think things from the customer. I think the interesting thing about native rollups and base rollups is that what you're doing is creating you will be able to have L2s that are faster and cheaper than Solana. Like, that's what you're going to have, that have perfect interop with Ethereum. And I know from the outside, it looks like, okay, this mambo jumbo of Ethereum researchers, again, some new term that nobody understands. But what we're building now is just a solution to the problems that the Ethereum rollup-centric roadmap created. Ethereum decided not to leave decentralization on verifiability. Many of the other ones changed their consensus. I believe the consensus is the most interesting part on the bean chain that Justin is working on of Ethereum. Decided not to change its properties. Actually, it's making it more decentralized, more post-quantum secure, more safe, more CK native, because it's going to choose CK hashes that are CK native. I think that's a correct take, because you can choose performance over decentralization and verifiability. The thing is that if you do that, you can continue until having 10 servers, and it doesn't change anything from Web 2. I have been building Web 2 applications for my whole life, and I love doing that. But the core idea of blockchains is that they're verifiable and they're decentralized. What I agree with you, Andy, with many people, is that Ethereum at one point got too obsessed with that, didn't deliver in some areas, or there are some issues, and I think these are fixes to those issues. What are the issues? A, there's not good interop. If you show to your mother or father, like, yeah, this is an L2 and you can move assets, there's some protocols like across that make it simple, but there's no, like, it should be for the user, Ethereum should be only one place. And I want to have that. And I believe that native rollups make it safer and cheaper by removing fraud proofs, or like by removing CK verifiers that can have bugs. But base rollups enable interoperability between the DAL1 and DAL2. You could have something on DAL1 on the same block being executed on DAL2 and then go back, or switch assets between DAL2. This won't take a year. Like, I cannot disclose everything yet, but we have quite a few friends working together on site in London, and we're gonna publish something in the next few days that shows that pre-comps or interop are not so difficult to implement, and we have them almost ready with real code. Like, it's not gonna take 5 years. It's gonna be ready in a few weeks. It's gonna work, and we will be able to showcase it with hundreds and thousands of transactions per second. On what I believe is the motto of Ethereum, it's not that I don't believe in just in research or the burn. I think it's gonna be this incredible community that has the best applications, where everything works perfectly. We have everybody that is building something wants to build first on Ethereum. So we need to keep that motto. I think that's what's gonna make things long term. Like, it's what's gonna make Ethereum the best. If we don't have base rollups and we don't have native, you don't have that cohesion, and you're breaking you're not making the user feel comfortable. So this puts Ethereum L1 and L2s back on track to give the best experience to users. I think that's what's going to make ETH, one of the things that is going to make ETH performant long term. The usability, rather than only technological research, is the fact that applications work correctly, fast, cheap, and they're connected to the New York of DeFi, that is Ethereum.
Imagine if the world's GDP moved on chain. Guys, say GM to SafeNet. The newest protocol by Safe isn't a blockchain, and it's not a new layer 2. It's a transaction processing network built to send money anywhere and swap anything on thousands of layer 2s from a single universal balance in sub 500 milliseconds. It's fast, it's smooth, and it's simple. And it's built with safe multi-sig level security in mind. SafeNet unlocks smart accounts across multiple chains, allowing users to supercharge security, scalability, and speed. So get started today at net.safe.global, and remember to follow @safe on X.
Yeah, and my only point on that is just that I think that there's been a lack of prioritization on UX and a overemphasis on decentralization, which is probably by design. But I think it's time to kind of really prioritize what people are doing on chain and UX. But then also, as Justin said, we have AI agents and these AI kind of operators. I mean, are we really even going to be taking our ledgers out and doing transactions on chain in the future is the question, right? So does it really matter? Or are we just going to be using natural language models to express what I consider now to be intents on chain? So, Robbie, take us a little deeper into the technicals of native rollups, will you? And some of these precompiles, state proofs, state access proofs, things like this.
Yeah, well, I'd like to maybe get into that, and to set the scene for that, I want to put a mental model in front of you guys and kind of get your take on whether it's valid or not. Because Andy and I have been having lots of these conversations with ZK teams, and also talking about this evolution of scalability, ultimately starting from the L1, but then going into the rollup centric roadmap. First optimistic rollups, then the acceleration of ZK. I think everyone's kind of on board. Like, every rollup will be a ZK rollup once ZK is accelerated. But ultimately, the rollup L1, L2 landscape starts to get really, really blurred. And these things just kind of look like blobs of state that exist in the void, connected via ZK. Justin, I see you're kind of nodding your head. Could you kind of just validate that mental model for us, and maybe start to connect that to some of the pieces that Ethereum is working on, snarkification, etc.?
Yeah, so we basically started with this execution environment where everything was luxurious. We had full synchronous composability. We had very little friction, and then we had this problem of scalability and fees. And so what we did is that we we kind of left this very cozy execution model and kind of made sacrifices. There were trade-offs made. We basically introduced boundaries. We have these silos. We have these centralized sequencers, and we have slow asynchronous communication between those silos. And really what I think will happen is that we're going to go full circle, or we're going to go back to this luxurious world, but the fees will be 100 times lower or even less than what they were previously. And in order to get there, we need to solve two fundamental challenges. The first one is this like really low latency communication, trustless communication between these abstract pieces of state, as you put it. Previously, if you wanted to communicate between two pieces of state, for example, Aave and Uniswap, like you want to make a liquidation on Uniswap, you just make a call to Uniswap and you wouldn't think twice. Now today, you really have to think twice, and because of these asynchronous boundaries, you can't even do like liquidations properly because you don't have unified liquidity and things like that. So, what I think will happen is that yes, we will solve the low latency communication. That's with the real-time proving, and with native rollups, it's sufficient to have next slot real-time proving as opposed to same slot real-time proving. And then the second thing that needs to be solved is more of a social problem, is like, how do we all coordinate around a shared sequencer? Because if you don't have the shared sequencer, then you don't have the synchronous composability. And the way that I think about it is that the only viable strategy for such a diverse ecosystem as Ethereum to agree on a shared sequencer is to have something which is maximally credibly neutral. And the only thing out there that is maximally credibly neutral is Ethereum itself, because it doesn't introduce a new token, a new brand, or a new security assumption. And I certainly don't think that if a specific cluster or L2 player comes up with their own sequencer, that they should expect their competitors to go and adopt it. I mean, we do have a project like Espresso that are trying to be more neutral because they're not associated with any one L2. But even Espresso, has a new token, a new brand, and a new security assumption. So, some players do like Espresso, but not everyone. And because it's a subset, it's going to be an uphill battle.
On one of the issues is that none of these clusters, this happened before with like hardware from the 70s to 2000. None of these clusters have incentives to prioritize the interoperability between the different clusters. Like, you want to keep your users, because that's what you are gonna make money with the fees of, like, actually it's a tax on the like of getting out of the cluster or in. Like, that's the only way they can do it. Like, that's the way you can make revenue long term. I respect many of these teams. I think these teams improved Ethereum a lot, but also at some point, I don't think Ethereum development can be blocked by the business needs of different, like, many of my customers might get angry with me, but hey, I'm an Ethereum, I'm an Ethereum person, and that's what I tell everyone. It's like, I want Ethereum to win, and for Ethereum to win, we need the Ethereum infra to be top notch. On L2s need to start using this infra. I don't think there will be a lot of social coordination problem. I think everybody, the experience, that's what I was trying to say before. I don't know if I explained myself because of not being an English native speaker. The taxi driver thing is like, what I'm trying to say is like, the user, if a taxi driver understands that he can move assets very cheaply and very fast between L2s and L1, on the other chain that doesn't do that, doesn't have it, he's going to choose the first one, right? That's what I think you need to think from the customer backwards to the infra, not the other way around. So the social coordination problem will be solved by the incentives that you have of users being happy by having a cohesive flow on Ethereum. So I think it will be that's the incentives you will have in place. I think the demand will be there. I'm speaking with countries, with governments, with big corporations. Many of them want to launch rollups. The demand will be there. It's already there. Like, in the last few months, due to the changes in the US policy, everybody is trying to do something new. And there's, like, I'm getting calls every day by big players that want to use this. So the demand will be there. And I don't believe any blockchain, not Solana, not Sui, not Aptos, There's a new one called Pod Network that is super interesting. None of them will be able to have all the users that are needed. Every blockchain will have rollups. The difference is that Ethereum already has a map pipeline, has a lot of research, has a lot of teams that are working on that. The only thing we need to do is think backwards from the wallet to the infra, align the MEV players on align the wallets to make an excellent interoperability between each part. And whoever doesn't want to do it, he will be left behind.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of dynamics on the incentive alignment that I think will happen. Like one of them is that if you are part of the long tail, if you single-handedly haven't amassed a large amount of TVL, well, you have an incentive to go connect to some other source of TVL. And so what I think will happen is that the long tail of L2s will have an incentive and might be some of the first movers to become based. What I think might also happen is app chains, right? Because one of the big questions today, if you want to launch an app, is which L2 do you launch on? It's a difficult question. But in my opinion, the obvious answer should be you just launch your own chain. That is like the most credibly neutral thing. That is the one that minimizes dependencies on other ecosystems, governance structures and security assumptions and branding and all of these things. But in order for app chains to be viable, you need them to connect to broader network effect, right? Because if I'm a tiny app chain and I'm a little island in the middle of the Pacific, like I'm just going to die out. And so today, apps have an incentive to launch on L2s because they connect to a broader ecosystem. But once we basically realize this vision of L1 contracts with lower fees, then you can just deploy as if you did in 2017 as a smart contract.
Also, I think the long tail, to support the long tail, is going to help Ethereum long term, because Warren Buffett always says, I don't invest in tech because a kid in India or Argentina or anywhere from a garage can disrupt the market. So that's in some way bad for competition, because there's no motor. But that's good for users. That's good. That's one of the good things about capitalism. Anybody can innovate on disrupt the market and provide a new thing for the users. And I think that if we have frameworks, there's one that we're creating between many parties called Fabric. It's more like, for now, it's more like guidelines on specs. I hope at some point it's also code like Geth. You will be able to support people that didn't have TVL. They didn't raise a lot of money, and they can innovate, try new ideas. And if those ideas are cool, they can influence the full market. That's very difficult nowadays. If you have that's one of my criticisms with crypto dynamics in terms of like the social layer. You cannot create something new and influence everybody just by creating something that is good for the user. You need to align a lot of people. I think this will help just launch a new rollup that is native and based on, if you have cool ideas and the users like it, they will start using it.
I think that dynamic is particularly important, because if you're one of those young people that wants to build on Ethereum, and some VC or some fund or somebody's taking a chance on you, and you want to launch an app chain, to do it today is to launch as an island in the Pacific. Justin, your thesis here about based app chains is actually the most compelling that I've heard for any sort of app chain, because I got so much pushback all the time about this, where it's like, no, man, we don't need more chains. We don't need app chains because there's no interop. You have to bridge, and there's all this concern. But basically, what you're saying, Justin, is that the new the new launch your DApp on Arbitrum because it's DeFi, or launch your game on Optimism because it's a gaming chain or something. That's more going to be like launch your app chain as the based app chain, and then tap into all the other based chains and app chains that can coexist in silos, but also have that kind of sort of native synchronous composability, which is pretty compelling for Ethereum, I think.
Yeah, and just to like set the expectations, it is going to take time in order to truly reduce the friction close to zero, because we need to simulate the equivalent of these synchronous calls. We need to do things like blob packing and blob sharing and shared proofs, and we need to do things like ag layer, where we have cross rollup bundle safety, and there is a bunch to be built, so it will take time. One of the things that I think will happen in the shorter term, and we're already starting to see it, is projects choose base rollups just because they're more simple and more credibly neutral. Like one great example here is Namechain, right? ENS has only a single source of truth. You can't launch ENS chain simultaneously on Arbitrum and Optimism. There needs to be a root of trust, and the only natural, credibly neutral thing to do is to launch your own chain. And the only appropriate sequencer for Namechain is in my opinion the L1 sequencer, and it's no surprise that they've announced that they're going to become based. And in that vein, what we're going to see, I think, is similar entities. So Fede talked about nation states. Like, put yourself in the shoes of a nation state. Do I want to launch on Optimism or on Arbitrum? No, right? Like, I need this maximal credible neutrality. I need to be as close to the metal as possible. Put yourself in the shoes of a very, very large institution. Like, do I want to launch on top of Arbitrum or Optimism? No, like I want to be as
Not
close
even
to the
that.
metal.
Do you want to launch on Solana? They don't want to launch on a chain owned by somebody else. They want to own their own chain. I'm working, for example, in a concrete land registry. It's one of the ones that I can talk about. They literally told me, like, we need to launch our own blockchain, and they wanted to launch something with Cosmos. And I explained them why that was a bad idea for too many reasons. And I explained them, until base rollups, I didn't have a proper solution. Like, I started with ZK rollups, but to be fair, there wasn't an easy ZK rollup to launch. So then, like, I didn't want to do the infra. Like, I sell infra, but I didn't want to sell them the infra. I just wanted Ethereum to be tapped on real use cases. On base rollups are an excellent example of that, because they need to run their chain. It needs to be proven. It needs to be verifiable. And they also win all the good things that Ethereum has: the TBL, the user base. So you have, from my point of view, it's in some way the end goal of what blockchains wanted to do: verifiable computers that all can work together between each other.
I have a quick clarification, because we're talking about launching app chains, which I fully agree with, and retaining sovereignty and ownership over that block space. And we're talking about synchronous composability, and I love the example of going and executing a liquidation on Uniswap via liquidation on Aave. I think that's one of the most practical examples. But we're talking about it almost entirely in the context of the sequencer and being based, and that is how you tap in. You can be a based app chain, retain your sovereignty, and tap into the synchronous composability. But we started out talking about native rollups and how if you use ETHDA and you use the native precompile, you also get synchronous composability. So is it the case? Is that still the case? Like, do you necessarily need to be based? Can I be a native rollup that uses ETHDA, but I run a single sequencer? Can I still get synchronous composability?
So the synchronous composability technically only requires shared sequencing. And one example of a shared sequencer would be the base sequencer, but it doesn't have to be. You don't need to be native. So you could imagine a non-native virtual machine, maybe something like StarkNet, which runs Cairo, that could be synchronously composable with EVM state. There needs to be a layer of translation. And the good news is that we have several actors that are specialized in this translation. We have things like searchers and builders that will bridge the gap. I mean, you can think of it as being a very similar problem to bridging the language barrier between two dexes. Let's say Uniswap and SushiSwap or something. They have a different notion of state and how they handle the order book, and the arbitrageurs will just specialize at bridging the gap. And then what I think we'll see as well, as you said, Andy, is AIs, just bridging that gap. So the fact that you're not native is not a fundamental limitation. The one thing that native does unlock is this fact that you don't have to worry about the real-time proving, because that's done by the L1, and the L1 has this superpower that it's allowed one extra slot, which the applications don't have that kind of luxury.
Got it. I'd like to go through some of the pushback that you received on the forum, Justin, specifically from some of the larger prominent L2 builders and professors of sorts. One being Ed Felton, one of my favorite people in the space, great, smart guy, has built a lot of really great tech for Arbitrum and off-chain labs. One of his pushbacks, Justin, was that basically rollups need more expressivity. Basically, that rollups on top of Orbit, which can be L2s or L3s, or Stylus, which can effectively have a multi-VM setup, cannot express themselves within this native precompile. And I don't know if you have that in front of you or if there's any more details that I was missing out there, Rob. But yeah, what's kind of your rebuttal there or thoughts about expressivity of rollups? And I think you kind of just touched on it in terms of the different VMs, but yeah, maybe just clarify.
Yeah, so at first approximation, there's the EVM equivalent rollups, and then there's the rest. And in my opinion, if you want to do something other than EVM equivalents, you need a really, really good reason to do so. So Cairo is maybe a great example, right? Because they're an order of magnitude, maybe 2 orders of magnitude more snark friendly by just completely changing the programming model. Arbitrum is maybe another great example, right? With Stylus, they've unlocked WASM, and now they can tap into millions of developers that can now develop for Arbitrum versus the whatever it is, 100,000 or less developers that know Solidity. And so for them, it's a massive 10x unlock. And you can go down the list of virtual machines. So one of them might be MegaETH. Like they've decided to change the state tree, and that gives them 10x faster write bandwidth. That is another 10x optimization. But if you're going to depart from the EVM, and you're only making 10% optimization, then is that really worth it? And I think the native rollup precompile, the execute precompile, will basically kind of reinforce the gap between these two categories. We're going to see things that are EVM equivalent and things that are very diverse and innovative, and get a huge benefit by doing so. Now, one of the questions is, can we relax EVM equivalence so that it's not like super rigid and allows for some amount of innovation? And I think the answer is a big yes. So one idea here is to actually expose a lower level virtual machine like RISC-V within the EVM. And the reason why RISC-V might be an especially appropriate choice is that within the industry of ZKVMs, more than half of the vendors are building RISC-V ZKVMs. It seems to be the de facto industry standard. And so if we're going to be implementing and enforcing this precompile using ZKVMs in the backend and their RISC-V ZKVMs, then we might as well make use of this expressivity. This is basically the same idea as Stylus, right? Because the way that the Arbitrum fraud-proof game is implemented is with WASM. And so they were like, hey, let's just expose it. We have it for free. And for Arbitrum, it was a great unlock. And I think for Ethereum, it could also be a great unlock there. And so if you have a custom precompile, for example, then you could implement it in RISC-V, and that will kind of be a simulation of that precompile, and you get similar benefits. You'd get maybe a more optimal implementations because you have access to this lower level virtual machine. Now, the other thing that you could imagine doing is basically having the execute precompile basically stop and pause every time it hits an instruction that it does not understand. And it will basically revert back to some sort of external state transition function that can be handled by the application. So there could be a custom foolproof game or a custom snark circuit for the state transitions that are not understood. And so if you imagine a long string of computation, there might be interleaving parts of the computation which are not natively understood by DVM, but that's fine. You just have checkpoints in and out every time you kind of interleave, and then you thread the needle by using this glue state transition function that will that will piece everything together into one continuous execution. So in theory, even with the execute precompile, you can do arbitrarily complex computation just by threading in and out. And then there's all sorts of other things that we're like considering in the design space. So one of them could be what if we could programmatically change the state tree? So as an application developer, instead of using whatever's available on Ethereum, right now, which might be a Patricia Merkle tree or a binary tree or whatever it is, you can specify your own thing. And so in the case of Mega ETH, where they are like 100% EVM equivalent with this one exception where they've changed out the tree, well, now they can make use of that precompile. And so I think what will happen is that there's going to be this design exploration phase where we kind of try and understand what makes sense to support in terms of flexibility. There's going to be some things that are very low effort and very high value because it means that more people can come under the fold of native rollups, and some things that are going to be extremely complicated and might only benefit one L2. And I think maybe those things will naturally have to wait.
Appreciate the in-depth answer there. Fede, anything to add as well?
Yeah, I was gonna focus on the RISC-V part. Like for me, Ethereum is first a set of values on a community of people that come from different parts of the world with different objectives, but they coordinate around one idea: to create a world computer, the safest, fastest, cheapest world computer on. I have never been a big fan of Solidity or the EVM. I develop in too many languages, and I have, for different reasons, I could go into details. I'm not a fan of Solidity more than the EVM. I don't have a huge issue with the EVM. I have a bigger issue with the Solidity. I think if we're gonna become a world computer, RISC-V is the way to go. Like for me, Ethereum is the consensus, the social layer plus the consensus. Like the consensus has no match. Somebody the other day said that Celestia is today what Ethereum is gonna be in 2028 or something like that. No, like the consensus is favors availability on liveness over safety. You have 4,000 real world nodes running. Tendermint can only run with 100 nodes. There's too many things I can go over it. Those things, like, I love Celestia and Mustafa. I think they created something very good. I think it's gonna also actually help Ethereum in many cases because the DA layer might not probably scale to the degree we want. I actually helped many of these clusters of rollups to use Celestia as a DA layer.
Don't tell Justin that. Don't tell Justin. Don't tell Justin. He's gonna lose it.
No. I think I disagree. I think Justin explains very well that Ethereum provides different type of services. You can choose different type of services, and you can tap into the truth of Ethereum that is the best trust available, and you can rent or you can use which part you want. For some use cases, Celeste is okay. For other use cases, it's not. So I think in Ethereum, I don't see Justin or Vitalik or Dangrad as fanatics. I think they're actually, one thing that shows this is like the other day also somebody said, people are saying that base rollup and native rollups are the way to go because of alignment. If you check my Twitter, I criticize the EF. I support the EF in many ways. They have the level of openness from Justin, Vitalik, and many others to new people like us is incredible in comparison to the rest of the industry. I'm super proud of being part of Ethereum and working with the EF. But they also criticize it. That shows that it's a open organization. It's not because of alignment. Like I'm literally criticizing Solidity on the EVM in a podcast of Ethereum, talking about Ethereum with one of the top researchers of Ethereum. The reason why I was criticizing it is because for me, the world computer needs to go towards the ISA, the CPU that everybody's gonna use in the world. Your MacBook, it's ARM, similar to ARM, that is similar to RISC-V. But everybody's gonna use RISC-V or ERM on the hardware. That's a competitor to the previous ESIs that were x86, Intel, AMD. And I believe Ethereum needs to go towards that. And this is also an opportunity for Ethereum to support the most important is used everywhere. So we will be able to, like, your EVM is different. Okay, you can run it on top of RISC-V, as Justin said. You want to support Move, an amazing language created by Libra, Facebook researchers. I think it's an amazing VM on programming language. Perfect. Ethereum will support it. Like, Ethereum will be able to run any type of computation that we want with the properties that I said before. It's going to be super cheap thanks to centralized map players running in base rollups. It's going to be safe because we don't have any more a solidity contract with a multisig to verify either the fraud proof or the ZK thanks to native. So I believe that RISC-V in some ways is not gonna only enable the current players, but it's gonna enable a lot of innovation in other ways. On Ethereum, it's a decentralized computer. Like, for me, I'm not saying Justin or the EF or any other. For me, I'm interested in Ethereum because of that, not because of the VM or Solidity. Like, those are languages. I like a lot of languages. I don't like that one. I like the protocol of Ethereum that enables to run anything, and this will enable more things.
Yeah. I realize we're drawing down on time here, so I think just maybe one last one from the comments that came to the native rollups piece. And we're outsourcing our comments today to Ed Felton because he's smarter than Andy and I. It makes our lives easier. So for this case, we're talking about kind of RISC-V and embedding this deeper into the L1 to kind of like increase the expressivity of some of these state transitions. Ed pushes back and basically says, in practice, a chain needs to have a single state transition function because it's a core principle for these contracts, for any contract to call any other contract, and that these calls can nest within one another. And so we can't have a separate EVM execution state transition function and another state transition function to extend these features to another VM. We basically need to have one single state transition function in order for these contracts to call one another and for them to nest. So does this contradict the RISC-V idea? No, Fede's shaking his head, Justin's shaking his head. So how can we reconcile these two ideas?
Go check the code base of R55. It's not production ready, but there's different ways of doing it. You just need an API or some type of way of communicating the two things. Like, that's an engineering problem. It can be solved.
Yeah, so R55 is this initiative, I believe, from Ithaca, the team behind Ref, so Georgios and company. I haven't looked into it myself, but it actually, ironically, a very similar thing to Stylus, where you have this separate virtual machine and you can thread in and out. And as Ed said, you need to have this nesting and whatnot. And this goes back to the comment that I had where you have a long piece of computation. You may start within the VM, but you might want to go in and out arbitrarily. Well, you just have checkpoints, and then you kind of patch the gaps with your custom state transition function.
If that was correct, you couldn't call C code from Rust, like literally. Like, you can call it because what you're doing is agreeing on an interface between the things. That's what Ethereum calls API. Actually, I think it's everywhere called, I don't know, like English, sorry, dyslexia, but it's API, just a way of like agreeing on how you call things between different things. So you just need to agree on that. I didn't even check the R55 code base. I know it, but I'm sure they solved it. And if they didn't solve it, we can solve it. Like, it's not an impossible problem to solve.
I guess Ed does make a good point that if you take what was written in the ETH research post literally, then yes, like as currently suggested, then you have these engineering difficulties. But like what was presented first of all is not meant to be the end all be all. Like, there is a whole design space exploration, and also even if we were to go with that as a first step, there is room to further generalize the precompile down the line.
Got it. Justin and Fede, both, one thing that you guys mentioned with regards to base roll, specifically, Fede, you mentioned how it was more of a social and political coordination problem regarding giving up economic value, basically. And Justin, on one of our last podcasts, I think it was like the first one that we did, we talked about the incentive mechanisms for rollups as they are today, especially those with large user bases, TVL, and distribution, to become based. And you suggested some some ideas. But now we're thinking about native rollups more so. Is the incentive question the same still, or perhaps better said, how are you thinking about teams that you've been speaking to and have received an astounding recognition for this idea and their acceptance of it? How are you thinking about their transfer from their current setup, which many of them may use 2 or 3 parts of this 4-part stack, to a full native rollup? And what is the incentives required for them to do so? And is it just a game of like somebody does it and then the dominoes fall?
Yeah, so there is going to be some work. Like, first of all, we need a hard fork, and the good news here is that if we really want this precompile, I believe we can have this hard fork in 2026. And the reason is that even though the end game is to have this precompile be enforced by snarks, we can have it be enforced through naive re-execution. And so in some sense, it's just a copy-paste job for the execution clients, where they reuse the EVM that they've already implemented it, and now they just re-expose it through a slightly different API. Now, in terms of what needs to be done on the rollups, for the incumbent rollups, what they'd have to do is take their current state transition function and decouple it into 2 parts. One is the EVM state transition part, and then what some L2 ecosystems call the derivation function. So the derivation function is everything around the EVM, and it handles things like deposits and withdrawals. It handles things like authenticating the sequencer, special system transactions, maybe the Security Council making an emergency stop, or maybe some governance transactions. And once these things are cleanly decoupled, you can take the EVM part and basically just replace it with this one line of code. For some rollups that might be easy. For other rollups, it might be complicated. It depends on how it was implemented. For new rollups, the barrier to entry might be significantly lower, and if you're designing to be native from day one, then you might have like very clean abstractions, and it might be relatively easy. Now, in terms of the incentives for becoming native, I've talked about removing the bugs and the security councils, but one thing I didn't talk about, and this is something that teams might not, be willing to share publicly, but they basically don't want to go to prison. And I don't. These are literally the words that people tell me. They want to basically reduce the surface area of legal attack, and whether that's a security council, or or whether that's a governance token having control of a sequencer, whatever it is, they just want to minimize that. These are sometimes entrepreneurs who have left the USA and want to go back home. These are people who are not sleeping well at night, or just like for selfish mental health purposes. They like that direction. But yeah, that goes above and beyond all of the other incentives that I've already mentioned.
2 things. The first one is I fully agree. Most people don't know it, but I have been in crypto since 2015, working full time since 2017 on my full team joining, because most of my team was in Web2 2020. But we became public after we got a call related to Tornado Cash. We were helping on research, a paper called Tutela. You can check it out. And then we got proposed by some people to enter the multi-sigs and other things. On the day before everything happened, I got a call saying like, hey, you're going to have to stop working on privacy, and you have to stop doing this and that, and you might have, like tomorrow, some people might knock your door. And that's when I decided to become fully public. Like before I was anonymous, and one of the reasons was because I didn't want to go to jail. Recently, I raised money. I helped raise one of my co-founders, RJ from Align. You cannot imagine the amount of time and energy that is invested in working with lawyers. We have legal firms in Argentina, that where we have the engineers, Uruguay, where the labs is created, the US, Cayman, BBI, like the amount of energy on time due to regulation put on founders to not go to jail for only doing the good thing that is creating good infrastructure is incredible. And one of the reasons is because the definition of decentralization is not very clear. And if you're a good player, it's very difficult to know how to protect yourself from these things. So working on privacy or launching a token, until recently was a huge issue. I believe that in 50 years, we're going to laugh about that, as we laugh about people working on encryption, professors in the 90s that wanted to have, like, people did tattoos of RSA. Like, it was a crime to teach or write books about RSA. On the funny part is that they didn't prosecute the bad players. They prosecute many of the good founders. On the people doing real business, I don't know, they did a lawsuit against consensus. So I think that Justin should said something very important. Like, I literally became public just because I didn't want to go to jail. And if not, I would probably stay anonymous because I wanted people to know me. Yes, like, you want to be able to launch infrastructure easily, not to have to think a lot about the legal system. And I think in this way, base rollups help.
Awesome, guys. Well, this is a conversation that took many turns, some curveballs, some laughs, really insightful messages across the board as well. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us today. Always a pleasure. And Fede, you're always welcome on back as long as you're staying out of jail. Can't have you in there. And Justin, same to you. So, guys, thank you so much.
Thanks, Robbie and Andy. And one last thing I wanted to mention. It's the first time somebody invites me to a podcast, so I am super thankful to you guys. I think I'm pretty vocal on Twitter. I think you guys are doing a great work at opening debates, something that sometimes don't happen so much in crypto. And second of all, I'm pretty surprised. I don't know if you guys are engineers or what, but I'm pretty surprised by the level of deepness on the technical things that you understand. Like, I've been following your Twitter, and it's pretty surprising how you follow debates that are in telegrams, in calls. Like, so congrats. It's a great work.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. It's been a lot of years of podcasting and reading. So what Justin says, sometimes it just kind of flies over, but you live and you learn, right? So that's how it goes. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.